It's like putting a lot of pieces of different puzzles together to form one big vision.
So these objects are not coming from the Arab world or just South Asia. No, they're coming from the entire spectrum of the Muslim world.
There were many instances that we both witnessed or heard of that people moved into that room and were visibly shaken or in awe or even in tears because of the sanctity of these objects. So I think that was the intention that we wanted to reflect.
Welcome to the very last episode of Hwar AlMadar. My name is Mikey Mhenna. Today we are recording here from Jeddah at the closing symposium of the Islamic Arts Biennale 2025. Alf Mabruk to all of you. Today we got a special edition because we're sort of zooming out beyond AlMadar to talk about the symposium more broadly and to speak to three of the assistant curators who all did really exceptional research. I got to hear you guys talk yesterday and I almost demanded that we do this episode. So I'm really excited. With us, we have Rizwan Ahmad, Abdali, and Bilal Badat. And I want to talk about your research on Haramayn. So maybe let me just ask a really basic question. Bilal, I'm going to start with you because you're the closest. What is Haramayn? For people who have no idea what this term means.
The Haramayn refers to the two holy cities. And specifically that refers to Mecca al-Mukarramah and Medina al-Munawwara. And the reason why they are called the two holy cities, or the reason why they are defined as the two holy cities, is because, of course, in Mecca you have the Kaaba, which is the house of God, and in Medina is the place where the Prophet Muhammad migrated to, and this is where his mosque is located, and this is also the location of his tomb.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to continue with a couple of first principles questions before we stretch out a little bit. So, Sada, can you explain to me what it means to be like an assistant curator at the Islamic Arts Biennale and how you guys got this brief of doing all this research?
Oh, okay. How do we get the brief? I really can't remember the beginning. Now we're reaching the end. But we have actually worked together in the first Islamic Art Biennale. I was an artist in the first edition where I have introduced an installation of 84 tombstones from Al-Ma'la Cemetery and an artwork titled After Hijrah. So this was my first meeting with the whole team together and with Dr. Julian Raby. So in the second edition, my role was different as an assistant curator, where we looked into the themes, the local collections, the historic research, even the contemporary artworks, and how to create the conversation between all of these different aspects.
Yeah. Rizwan, I want to bring you into this for a second. The idea of researching Haramayn, how much was that exclusively what you guys were focused on the last few months, last year?
I would say not an exclusive focus, but it was definitely a primary intention because you're doing all these episodes on AlMadar, and there's a distinction between the remit of both sections of the Biennale. So AlMadar, of course, is having a very international focus. What we really wanted to focus on, and it's a big objective of the Biennale as a whole, is to focus on collections here within the kingdom. And of course, the two holiest sites, as Bilal has talked about, what the Haramayn entails is Mecca and Medina. And what we really wanted to focus on are those objects that have the closest proximity or relationship with both the Kaaba and the historic mosque in Medina. Many of these objects are perhaps not very well known outside of the context of Saudi Arabia. And so that's where really that beginning scope began, of understanding these objects and these collections and really representing them in all of their forms and in the most expressive way that we could, so that people can really appreciate the sanctity of these objects, particularly because of their proximity and how long many of these objects were, even in the case of the spout, were on the Kaaba for decades, sometimes even centuries and so on. So that's really why we have this distinction between AlMadar and Al-Bidayah, where there was a real focus on the Saudi collections.
Yeah. Right before we started filming, I almost cut you guys off because what we were talking about was so interesting, and I wanted to make sure that we get it on camera. But Bilal, you were saying one of the main surprises on working on this thing was the diversity. Can you talk a little bit about that? What do you mean diversity in terms of people, in terms of objects, in terms of the sort of the surprise, the mystery around them, like diversity of what?
Yeah, I suppose it's the diversity of objects really is reflective of the diversity of people that were both in the Haramayn and also connected to the Haramayn through the object. So for many people, they couldn't visit these sacred places, but the objects in a way acted as a proxy. It kind of was a way for them to connect to the Haramayn. And this is through the Waqf tradition, which we can perhaps talk about later. And we can kind of go through specifically how does one connect to the Haramayn when one is in sub-Saharan Africa or in, in China. And by that diversity, we're referring to both social diversity. So we see that the objects are donated by people from all across the social strata. Diversity of gender, that was something that really came up, which I hope Sarah will expand upon. And also diversity of ethnicity. So these objects are not coming from the Arab world or just South Asia. No, they're coming from the entire spectrum of the Muslim world. Yeah. And this is something that we see all the way up until the present period. So for me, of course, the Haram, specifically Mecca and Medina, it is a space that you read about as being a place where everyone can come together and, color doesn't matter. And that might be something that you feel is just something that is, I suppose, just something that you read about, right? But when you see that physically manifested in the object, it really comes to light, and then you really understand what diversity is.
Can you give me an example of that? Or any of you feel free to chime in, like an example of some of that diversity?
I think one of the clearest examples was the Quran showcases that we presented in the Al-Bidayah space, because these are Qurans that are donated as Waqf. And then we have, on the far right, we have examples from North Africa, from Morocco. And then on the far left, we have one example from China. So this really is the spectrum, and we have everything in between, وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا. So we have the Maghrib, the Mashriq, and وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا. So I feel like that would be a great representative example. And within that range, you have Qur'ans donated by both genders.
Yeah. And over time, I think there's a 1,000-year spread in those showcases that Bilal is referring to.
How did you guys do this research? I mean, you worked collaboratively. Give me an example of like how you approached the curation, the research for the project, and some of the sort of decisions that you made that shaped what the research became.
So I think the focus for the galleries that we worked on, starting from Al-Bidayah to Mecca and Medina pavilions, was more about looking into local collections. So it started from there. We started looking in different local collections, either museums or private collections, anything that we can scan and really look into. We did various trips in Jeddah, in Mecca, and Medina, just to examine the different manuscripts and objects that we can include in these spaces within a certain narrative and curation as well.
Yeah. And this is a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it. What did you learn? I mean, what actually changed? What actually was new for you? Because a lot of times, as an observer, as a participant, I'd go to these exhibitions and I'm like, everyone putting this together knew all this stuff, and it's more of like a sort of like a high school classroom, like they're kind of just walking us through the things that they already know. Was anything new? I mean, Rizwan.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Sarah, you want to go ahead or?
No, maybe you go first. I'm a bit overwhelmed with the question.
What's new? What did you learn?
So much was new, and now just thinking back, it's hard to distill. But there was also a sense of discovery both within our team. We weren't aware of all of the collection, for example. His one perhaps clear example is that we, by working closely with Haramayn Authority and Kaula, we were able to spend a lot of time in these warehouses and looking through various collections. And only through that time spent in those collections were we able to get a real sense of the nature, the breadth of those collections, and the diversity of those collections. So a lot of discovery happened on site, actually understanding what existed. I think some examples are even, for example, the casing of the Hajar al-Aswad. This is an object that everyone sees, everyone knows, it's something very familiar, but actually there's not been much written or understood about how it's made, where it's made, and the context of how it's used. So although this is quite a recent object, I think the one we had on display is from the Saudi era. It's not one that predates the Saudi era. And it's a familiar object in the psyche of a lot of Muslims. there was almost nothing written on it. And so it needs a lot of time in association with the object, as well as understanding the context, looking through photographic records, looking through records of when various elements of the Kaaba were installed, including the casing of the Hajar al-Aswad. And this is just one example. There's so many we can go into, but there was a huge amount of discovery that took place through the cycle of the Biennale.
And it's also looking at so many different historic references and resources and travelogues, and just trying to connect so many different dots of the stories that you find written and to match those with the objects that we would find in those different collections. It's like putting a lot of pieces of different puzzles together to form one big vision, which was very interesting to be part of.
Yeah, I wonder if those learnings were things that were sort of like nice to knows, or if it was like, oh, wow, this actually changes materially the way I think about the Islamic arts.
I think, I think you're right, because of course we all know the objects before we came in, but it's the stories behind the objects that were just so fascinating. So like I'll give you an example of this Waqf tradition that I keep banging on about.
No, I want to get
I'll just give you like a very brief explanation of how it works. So we all knew what the endowment was. But then when we went to the Waqf library in Medina, and you read these kind of legal documents that accompany the Qur'ans, so we realized, say for example, it's like the 16th century, you're living in South Asia, let's say you're living in India, and you know that you're going to pass away, or maybe your father has passed away, or your wife has passed away, or the other way around, and you want to leave something on this earth that will continue to give blessings to yourself or that person. So what do you do? So one of the ways that they did it was that they were, so you basically patronize a Quran and you send it to Medina. Okay, so you go to a calligrapher, you go to a calligrapher and you pay the money, you say, write a Quran for me. And then you go to an illuminator and you say, illuminate this Quran. And then you go to a binder and you say, cover it with a leather binding in order to preserve this manuscript. And then you either go to Medina yourself, or you would send it on the annual Hajj caravans. So before you do that, you go to a witness and you say to that person, listen, legally, nobody can ever take this from Medina, and I never want this to be sold. I never want it to be destroyed. And I also, if you've got extra money, you say, I'm going to pay someone in Medina, a Qari, to recite this whole Quran or a chapter of this Quran on this particular day, okay? And then you send that money every single year to Medina through this kind of endowment principle. Now, in Medina itself, say, for example, you're someone coming from West Africa, okay? You go into the Rawda and you want to read the Quran. You find one on the shelf. It might be that person's Quran. You don't know that person. You might find that Quran. You pull it from the shelf and you read it. Now, the blessings of that recitation goes to this person from West Africa. It goes to the Prophet Muhammad, and it goes to either the donator of the object or the person in whose name that person is sending that object. Now, just what really blew my mind is, say, for example, the Qari, the designated reciter of that Quran, which you may have in Medina, say, for example, he passes away. Well, what happens then? Well, in Medina, you have this unbelievably sophisticated system where they have like a substitute. So even if it's 300 years after you sent that Quran and you're in your grave, someone is still reciting that thing in your name. Now, that's just one example. When we went to Kala, we found thousands and thousands and thousands. This tradition is stretching over, close to 1,400 years. It's remarkable, the sophistication of that Waqf system. And this is just one object in one mosque. This was taking place in the Mosque of Hamza, in mosques in Kufa, all over the Muslim world. So that really blew my mind, the way that art and ritual and spirituality and, these kind of legal requirements all come together in this one place. And this is one of the things that we tried to share in the Medina.
In that moment when you're like
pavilion.
Having your mind blown,
where
the people who upkeep this tradition, where they're like, what are you talking about? You don't know about this? We've been doing this for 1,400 years. Like, how do you not know about this? This is essential to our practice. This is essential. Were they surprised almost by your surprise?
The Kaula guys.
The Kaula guys. I mean, I think they've been doing incredible work.
We're not looking into it in the traditional sense. So if we're looking into Kaula, King Abdulaziz Endowment Libraries in Medina, It's basically a new modern building that houses all of these different traditional libraries that were around the Prophet's mosque or inside of it as well. So there were more than 100 libraries around Medina. And Kaula now houses, now houses 64 historic libraries. So when you go there, you can actually navigate through the different names of the libraries that were once there. If it's Arif Hikmat, if it's Al-Mahmudiyya. Al-Mahmudiyya, for example, is one of the oldest libraries in Medina. So yeah, it's not like going to...
But the keepers of the current manuscripts, we all had like these amazing interactions with them because they are really like the descendants of the Aghawat, the guardians of the Prophet's mosque, and they have this incredible emotional and like physical attachment to these manuscripts,
of course,
because of these stories. And so, it wasn't like walking into a normal archive for us. It was like a completely different experience where you had this huge weight of responsibility on your shoulders to really respect this tradition. And perhaps if they weren't like that, we might have just gone in as typical art historians documenting this stuff and leaving.
There was definitely more respect because of that. And all those interactions we had in Kaula, it was interesting with their librarians that we need to mention them because their dedication and effort. They know all the manuscripts, they know the location of all these manuscripts, but they treat them in a very similar way to the Aghawat probably would have.
Yes.
They have their own sections of the libraries. There's a huge responsibility. And as Sarah mentioned, the 64 libraries that have been compiled, they know which collections they are from. And there is a librarian assigned to specific collections. So when we were requesting manuscripts, you'd have to write the specific number, request it to that librarian. And they worked very closely with our team to ensure that process and understanding of these collections was continued in that way. But I think that garnered respect not only for the institution, but the collection. And as Bilal mentioned, that respect was fundamental in the way we tried to represent these objects and understand them in their full context.
Yeah. It's interesting. Sada, I want to talk about one of the other topics is sort of like areas of research around female representation. Tell us a little bit about how that was an area of interest and how it was sort of articulated in the research.
Okay, so how is it an area of interest? Personally, it's a topic that truly interests me, looking into Islamic art, Islamic history. I've often wondered what is the role of women. And one of the things that sparked that interest is actually looking into the history of the tombstones when I first started studying them. So when I looked into a big number of tombstones from Mecca, from Al-Ma'la cemetery, a lot of women were represented and within specific families. When I did the research on certain families like Al-Tabari, Al-Fasi, Ibn Fahd al-Makki, these families are quite well known in Meccan history, where a lot of the women from these families have excelled as scholars and also as scribes. So it made me think, why do we not know much about these women and we don't have a lot of things that are documented and written about them? So this started my interest in the subject. And then afterwards, when we started the journey in Kaula, we came across this beautiful Quran that was written by a woman named Sharifa Amina Aziza. It's a late 19th century Quran. And we couldn't believe that we came across this very simple, beautiful Quran, which you can find in Al-Munawwara if you go to the Medina Pavilion. It's showcased with all the notes that she has kept in the Quran.
Amazing. Say it again, where did you find it?
In Kaula, in King Abdulaziz Endowment Libraries. So it was part of the research that we did in Medina.
Do you know anything about who this person was?
We are, I think, finding out who she is. We're still navigating. We only know that she's married to someone called Naili Effendi, who was an Ottoman official. Was she originally from the Hijaz? This is also a question. But we know that she was a student, she was a teacher, and she kept all of these different letters inside of the manuscript, which kept it very interesting for us as clues to knowing more about her.
since this is taking place during the closing symposium, there's a lot of like hand-wringing and sort of not navel-gazing, but a lot of thinking about what is the role of the Biennale and how should we move forward? How do we represent Islamic arts here in Jeddah, but also going forward? How has your vision of Islamic arts changed, that term, over the course of this like intimate engagement as curators? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's the silence.
The tough questions. Yeah, that would be good to the tough questions.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously the question that everyone asks, isn't it?
Before you answer this question, I'll give you a little bit of a escape valve if you want it. But the question is, do you guys talk about this? Have you talked about this for the last 5-6 months?
Last night.
Last night at dinner we were talking about this.
Yeah. I think it's a very academic question. First of all, like that should be said at the outset, that this question comes from the academy. Okay. And not to say that that's a question that shouldn't be asked, but it's very important to say that not everyone has to ask that question. You don't have to define everything and try and put something in a box. That comes from a particular post-enlightenment and post-enlightenment way of thinking, which might not necessarily be useful in all contexts. For example, if you're trying to bring people to experience art, is the best way to do that to make them define it first? I would say no. Perhaps aesthetic experience might be a better way. Perhaps looking at the stories of the objects, that might be a better way to bring people in and educate them and to let them learn and experience these things for themselves, rather than saying, hey guys, here's this really complex question that no one has been able to answer, and we think it's important for you to answer it because we do too. But I was reminded of a really, there's this kind of very famous saying about Sufism, about, let's call it mysticism or tasawwuf. And the saying is that in the beginning, Sufism was a reality without a name, and later it became a name without a reality. And it's very similar to when we're talking about Islamic art, is nobody called it Islamic art in the past because they just lived that reality, right? It was a reality, and then it became a name that we had to we took all this stuff and we had to figure it out. We had to put it into this box. And now it's become a name and we're just arguing over the reality, right?
So just to add, I think that's a crucial point that Bilal was mentioning, because we were discussing this last night, is that this was never a debate historically. This was never a discussion that came up in the past. If you look at through the historical literature in the Muslim world, there was never a discussion about what is Islamic art, what is not Islamic art. And as far as I'm aware, I don't think it even comes up in the terminology and referred to as Islamic art in that way. So I think this is a question where it really maybe it doesn't even merit going into the question in further depth, because it's something that's really understood. It's inherent, and people who understand it, especially in the Muslim world, and people who are part of this culture appreciate this expression of art in all its forms, of the historical and even contemporary. And this discourse, as Bilal has been saying, it's an interesting one, because it does feel like something which tries to navigate into a realm which are of definitions. And by creating these definitions, it becomes exclusionary. It's more about who's involved and who's not involved, rather than thinking of it as something which is more fluid and understood and inherent. And I think that's perhaps the long-winded answer.
Yeah, no.
I think there are a lot of keywords to think about. First of all, the introduction of contemporary art or modern art into our thinking. Maybe this is the motive that made us push Islamic art into this box to differentiate it from everything else, because the art is not about the conceptual meanings in contemporary or modern art. So maybe the question came when art was introduced and in that manner. But then I think what is interesting, what is the role of spirituality in defining what's Islamic? What is the role of spirituality in defining what Islamic art is? How spiritual it is? Would it have come out of Islam? Has never existed? These are very interesting questions, I think, that should be put out there. And I think there are a lot of people who are shying out from mentioning Islam, having to deal with anything related to the religion itself because of so many different reasons. But it's related to the core of the religion. if we look into the history of Islamic art. It's a very big debate.
Yeah.
Very academic.
Yeah.
The spirituality part is really meaningful because over the course of doing this podcast series and coming to Jeddah so many times, there's moments where it feels like it's very highbrow, intellectual, and sort of the spirituality part of it can get lost for a viewer, not as participants.
Sure.
But the work that you did in this that we're discussing today is like right straight down the line spiritual. It's like we are like,
when we talk about endowments or gifting things to the Haramayn, then the motive is actually spiritual. When you think about the impact and how to get this to last for generations and generations to come, it is spiritual in its very own nature. So it comes from that root, which you cannot ignore.
And by context and association, so we talked about the intention, like Bilal was mentioning about the intention of these objects, the Waqf objects, which sit in a library, which the blessings are, the primary purpose is for the blessings, is for the barakah of this object and its association where it's placed, but also the nature of the objects and where they are and where they've been placed. Anyone who is from the Muslim world, or anyone who walks into, say, the Kiswa room, which I'm sure you've been into and seen, is immediately just struck in awe. Not necessarily because of the nature of the object. It's because of the nature of the association of the object. This is something which has adorned the Kaaba, the holiest site in Islam, and people always want to have a connection with the Kaaba. Their intention is to be as close to God as possible, and therefore being as close to the proximity of these holy sites brings that association. So I think the inherent, what we were trying to convey was that sense of spirituality in these first two galleries, and these objects really are reflective of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the term art is also, I know it's the Islamic Arts Biennale, but it's also putting these objects in a framework that is perhaps exclusionary of other things.
Yeah.
So, like when we're thinking about that, let's say, for example, the Madraj, this great staircase, in the local Indian sources, it was sent by a South Asian patron in the 19th century. It describes how when he went to see the Madraj after it was made, he did wudu, right? Which is obviously not something you do when you go to see a work of art, right? So you're thinking, well, what is this then? To that person, what was this thing, right? The same with the Medina textiles. The Ottoman sources describe how they were constantly reciting Quran whilst that particular object was made. Before it even comes to Saudi Arabia, before it even comes to Medina, they were taking it to certain shrines just so that people of the public could catch a glimpse of it, right? So, of course, this does not deny that they are beautiful objects and that people have a very profound aesthetic experience of that object. But I feel like the beauty only heightens something which is profoundly spiritual, and that the term Islamic art in that sense, when we're asking this question, well, what is Islamic about it? Well, that's what it is, right? The Islamic art is a big, big part of it, as well as the artistic aspect.
Yeah. How did it feel? This is maybe like not, you wouldn't expect this for this podcast, but how did it feel working on this work?
That's my answer.
Yeah.
I mean, it was phenomenal. There were so many times I distinctly remember the three of us would have to remind each other, because you would naturally working in such close proximity to these objects and for such a prolonged period of time, that we had to remind each other the fact that we are standing in proximity and being able to be in contact with these objects. And so it was actually really enjoyable doing that continuously, because what we didn't want to be at any point is completely desensitized to it, because the moment that happens, it then becomes an historical object, less an object of spirituality that has an emotional resonance with people. And we wanted to retain that emotional resonance throughout, up until it's on display, so that we can ensure that it's being displayed in a way that reflects that emotional resonance. And we're not just looking at it. I
remember one time us three were before everything was displayed, they put out the Kiswa panels as well as the Medina textiles in a large room. Mm-hmm. And Abdurrahman Azam was there, one of the artistic directors, and he just said, like, guys, like, you realize this is like one of the most blessed rooms in the world.
Look around.
Just look around at where you are, and that was remarkable. It was absolutely remarkable.
And we wanted to retain that, because it was imperative we did.
Yeah.
And it gives you a sense of responsibility.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
How did you manage that responsibility, Sada? How did you manage that responsibility?
Yeah, you tell us, Sarah. How did you?
Because it is a massive one.
It is a massive one. And when you look into, like, for example, endowments and how these were passed from different generations, then it's really passing through you to deliver this piece to the rest of the world, really, through the Biennale. So I think it's more than anyone can take, really. Maybe it will take me a couple of months just to understand what we have undergone in this experience. But I also envy a lot of the people who would see it for the first time without knowing, you know, all the behind the scenes behind it. It was a great honor, honestly,
Maybe
to
it's like
continue this
touch
cycle.
very briefly on some of the reactions that we witnessed when people went into the Kiswa room, for
Kiswa.
example.
Yes.
And we weren't sure how people would react. We weren't aware of, obviously we had been close to these objects, but there were many instances that we both witnessed or heard of that people moved into that room and were visibly shaken or in awe or even in tears because of the sanctity of these objects. So I think that was the intention that we wanted to reflect.
Yeah, and I think taking a lot of people on tours as well, starting from al-Bidaya up until the end with the pavilions. One of the people I took cried towards reaching Mecca Pavilion, and then he told me, I now see Islam in a completely different light. And I was like, huh, I never thought I would hear that.
Yeah. And also a big, beautiful shout out to the people that we worked with too, right? Like, of course, all the people that helped us to access the objects were also Julian,
Yes.
Rabi, Yahya Nurgat, who really helped support us with the research,
Absolutely.
Marcus Fraser,
Fraser.
Lewitt.
And Dr. Laut
Laut
was from Leiden University as well. It was a collaboration between our team and a very big team from all of the different institutions that we have collaborated with, either locally or internationally.
A lot of times when we're working on a project of this scale that feels so large, you know, and so spiritual, I would imagine that sometimes there's like somebody in your mind's eye where you're like, I'm doing this for them. Like, I need to do a good job for them.
Yeah.
Who do you think you were doing it for?
Gosh, good question, isn't it?
That is a good question.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say, can I give like two?
Yeah,
I think, yeah, I think certainly for my son, yeah, Hamza, who's like 4 now, but I suppose you're always thinking like it's such a, amazing thing to be like to be a part of, that you can like teach them and that they can also be a part of, you know, something that when he's older to be able to kind of read those notes and to maybe visit those places, and he's always in the back of my mind because of this. It's actually because of this Waqf tradition, right? And because there's so many of the Waqf notes, if you remember, it was always like, for my parents, can I do this for my parents, or can I do this for my children? You know, they're always keeping that blessings thing in mind. And so you have one, I suppose, responsibility to your children, but also to these people that were deceased, that passed before you, that created these incredible objects. And you really want to, some of them are like so tragic because it's like their children died very young, or their spouses died like very young, and they really just want to, and they're like almost pleading to the next person who might take that management, like, please, can you read this for me?
Yeah.
And I would be like so happy if you did this so that the blessings can be shared. And so I suppose it's all about passing it on, you know?
Extending your blessings.
Extending the blessings, exactly.
Beautiful.
How about you guys?
I would say, one person I thought about the whole time was my late father, Allah yarhamah. He was a historian, so I've learned everything about history through him. And I actually started my research into tombstones because of him, because of questioning how we deal with death and material culture altogether. So, I feel like I would see him in all the research.
Beautiful.
It's a very, very difficult one. I think also like immediate family, wife, kids, etc. And you think about the sense of responsibility, but also I think a lot for the members of family who have never had a chance to visit Mecca or Medina.
Yes.
And you almost feel like you're there as representing them, and you really need to reflect there because you speak to them, and they're, as with most Muslims around the world, they have a deep desire to visit Mecca or Medina, or at least once in their life. But not everyone gets the opportunity to. And so you feel a lot of responsibility on behalf of them, that you can do you can do a good representation to reflect how people feel and how the sentiment they feel towards these holy sites.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of people on earth have never been to Mecca,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so there's that piece of representation is meaningful. So I'm going to say with you, how did you feel? How did you think about, okay, we need to represent these places, and the people that are doing this work, without people even knowing, like so many people don't know about the work that they're doing, the dedication. How did you feel like, okay, we got to do this. We have to represent this in a specific way?
It's a tricky one. And I think it comes back a little bit to the kind of question about what is Islamic art, only in the sense of what I think we were mindful of is we didn't want to lose the sense of what these objects mean to people. Because in a typical exhibition environment or a museum environment, it can become an object behind a glass case. It can become something that feels distant. It can become something that feels as if it's never been used or really been understood. And we were really conscious of not doing that, because the Biennale is unique. As we know, it's not a typical exhibition or a museum. It's something which is far more about how can we convey what it means to be a Muslim, or how Muslims have expressed themselves. So I think that was perhaps the biggest thinking behind how we were doing, and that kind of sense of how we wanted to convey the sentiment of each of these objects, that we were making it feel as if it can be it's something that's accessible and something that you can have a relationship with.
Beautiful. Sara, what about you?
I think there is very little representation about art from the Hijaz and to the Hijaz. This was something that I have noticed as a student of Islamic art when I first started studying, that I couldn't find anything that would answer a lot of questions that I had while studying this field. And I often wondered, how do we not know much about the heart of Islam? This is where Islam has come from. Why isn't there a lot of documentation? So I feel like the Biennale kind of answers a lot of these questions that I grew up with coming from here as well. And also bridges international collections with local ones and with the right research, which I think is really important.
Amazing. Okay, last question to wrap up. Is there one figure, this is going to be kind of a listically type question, but just bear with me. Is there one figure or one object that is sort of like lives rent-free in your head, where you think about it all the time, you're sort of, you're waiting for something to cook on the stove, and it just pops up. One of the things that you're just like, I'm always going to think about this thing.
It's hard to think about one. There are so many.
Give us a couple.
I'll tell you, I know exactly. As soon as you said it, I knew exactly, and it's the Medina textiles.
Okay.
Because there's no tura there's no signature on them. And so, unlike the other ones that have a tura, which is the Sultan's signature, there's no signature on them, and there's no accompanying documentation, and there's no date. So there's no way to 100% match it with a historical record, even though in Istanbul, in the archives, it says, in this year we sent this set, in this year we sent this set. You can't say 100% that it matches those. So like sometimes, and this is like 1,000, I stare at them before I go to sleep, and then I'm thinking, like maybe from the ghaib,
makes perfect sense.
There's going to be like an answer. Is it Sultan Abdulaziz? Was it Sultan Abdul Majid? Was it Sultan Abdul Hamid II? Like, and I'm hoping that sometimes when I come here, like maybe there's like Khidr will come, or someone will come and he'll be like, listen, this is where they came from, because it's,
the date went to spam. We found it.
Yeah, exactly. Because when I'm writing about it now, of course, and when you're writing as an academic, you've got to give so many potentials.
Yeah,
there's like 5 potentials, right? But you're thinking, please, can I just somehow find that smoking gun somewhere?
Yeah,
that will lead me to an answer. So that's the one for me.
Sara.
Okay, I might choose Abdel Ghaffar's photography. So we have selected a selection of photos from Mecca's first photographer, Sayyid Abd al-Ghaffar, who was a photographer in the late 1800s in Mecca. I have so many questions about Abd al-Ghaffar, starting with his identity being a doctor, being a goldsmith, a perfumer, a mutawwif, so many different things.
Pistol maker. Right?
Goldsmith. Everything.
When was he born?
But,
do you know?
We don't know when he was born, but he died in 1906, and he was over 100 years old.
How did you find out about this person?
There's little research about him locally and internationally, and his collections are kept in Leiden University libraries.
He's Mecca's first photographer.
He's Mecca's first photographer. He has captured the most beautiful landscapes and portraits of officials of Mecca. Just to think of how a person in his time managed to convince the Sharif An al-Rafiq, to take a portrait at the time when photography wasn't widely known of or practiced. So I think, to me, it's still a mystery. I really need to know more about Abd al-Ghaffar, how he started his journey, how he became a photographer. Also coming from a scientific background as a doctor, it makes sense to experiment with chemicals and having a lab as well. So I think...
Amazing.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think for me, it's probably the monumental Quran. And it's a natural one to gravitate towards because of its sheer size. It blows you away just because of the nature of its incredible form. But I think when you really distill the amount of effort that would have gone in to produce this, Bilal spoke beautifully about it in the session yesterday, about how this Quran was developed. It's actually not the most beautiful calligraphy. There's, I think, a lot of mistakes even in the calligraphy, many areas where you can see the calligrapher had run out of space and there's lots of words kind of jumbled together at some point. So it's not necessarily about the calligraphy, it's not necessarily about the most beautifully refined object, but it's just a sheer example of determination and also scale of how people were trying to create something of this volume and size, how much effort it would have taken to compile, how much effort and cost it would have taken to ship.
Where did it come from?
It came from India, the north of India, Rampur, I believe.
Possibly, yeah.
Possibly Rampur. Yeah. And so when you look at it and you observe it, people are in awe just because of its size. But also you think that this is perhaps one of the largest known surviving Qur'ans. There's possibly another one, or there is another one also in India that Bilal had also come across. But everything from the size of the pages, the illumination, the calligraphy would have been in this bejeweled case, in this huge kursi that it would have sat on. It's just absolutely phenomenal to think of. And it's one of the first things that really hits you as you come in to the Biennale. So for that reason, that would be my choice.
Amazing.
Yeah. Sorry, can I just also say, you've been a very gracious host, but just from a genuine place of curiosity, is there an object that has resonated with you in your experience of the Biennale?
We're throwing it back to you, not getting away with
this. We would like to know.
Rule breaker. I love it. Let's see. That sort of stuck with me the most. I've spent so much time in AlMadar, to be honest, because of this series. But in Bidayah, I mean, as somebody who's never been to Mecca, I mean, the Kiswa is really, really remarkable, and I'll tell you why. Is because of the reactions people have to it. So if I saw a photo of it, or if I went, or actually it's not even if, the first time I went to see the Kiswa was before the opening, and it's a stunning display. That did not leave an impression on me as much as going to see it with, like, an hour later with the rest of the public programming scene, and seeing just the emotion. In those moments, it's become so obvious to me that the work that's being done is so much bigger than, hey, we should show some art.
Yeah, that's so interesting, isn't it?
That's really interesting.
Yeah, because you have this kind of Cartesian division between, like, the object and the people and the viewers. But what we were discussing about, this idea of art, it seems like for you it extends beyond the object so much, and that reflects back onto the object, the people that are around it.
Yeah, it's like to use sort of a crude example, if you're a musician playing music that's to be danced to, and there is no crowd of people dancing, you're not really doing anything. Like it's empty.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. Yeah. So without the spirituality of it, without people reacting to it and actually moving you, it's kind of totally misunderstood. It's not, without the idea that somebody was reciting the Quran while writing these pages, or without the idea of al-barakat and all that stuff, it's just a library full of books. Doesn't make, okay, so, you know,
that's really interesting.
You know,
it's really interesting.
It needs the other side of the coin. Otherwise,
it's a reflection.
It's a reflection.
It's reflecting both ways.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I appreciate this.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. This is the last episode of a really, really beautiful series. If you haven't caught up on the rest of them, you can find them on YouTube or wherever you find podcasts. My name is Mikey Mhenna. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.